So dear colleagues, today I have the honor of introducing a scientist whose research has advanced our understanding of how deeply plastic pollution has penetrated the very foundation of life. Professor Antonio Ragusa is an Italian physician, obstetrician, gynecologist, and a researcher who was the first to identify microplastic particles in the human placenta. This discovery, published in 2021, marked a pivotal moment in modern research. The work made by Professor Ragusa and his team demonstrated that the plastic particles are capable of reaching the sites once assumed to be biologically protected, the very place where new life begins. His study attracted wide international attention. The finding that plastic particles could present in the placenta and therefore in the developing fetus raised a profound scientific and public concern. The same microscopic plastic found in the oceans and environment have now been detected within the developing human body. Please join me in welcoming Professor Antonio Ragusa.
Thank you. I'm sorry, but I'd prefer to speak Italian. It's my native tongue, so I'm much more comfortable expressing myself in it, especially since I know there's simultaneous interpreting. Unfortunately, a few years ago, we discovered that plastics are present in the human placenta. Let me digress a little bit. Here you can see photos of plastic fragments found in the human placenta. This brief digression is necessary to show you that the very same plastics present in the oceans and seas are found in the amniotic fluid and inside our children. It's the same plastic because everything on Earth is interconnected and interrelated. When we made this discovery and published it, the news spread all over the world. Many media outlets showed interest. We introduced the term cyborg baby, that is, cyborg children, because these children are no longer just made of organic material, but also of inorganic. This term has gained popularity in international literature. Later, a lot of evidence emerged that plastics are inside the uterus and fetal placenta. We also checked if they were present in breast milk, and unfortunately, we found it there too. Many organizations became concerned. They said, "Does this mean mothers shouldn't breastfeed their babies?" No. Breast milk remains relevant even if it contains plastics. It is the best food for our kids because artificial mixtures contain even more plastics than breast milk. So, there's no other option. The only solution is to reduce the amount of plastics that mothers consume during pregnancy. There are certain methods, attitudes, and behaviors that can be adopted on an individual level to improve the situation and reduce the amount of plastic one ingests. This is a watercolor. It might look like a photograph, but it's not. It's a watercolor made by the greatest living watercolor artist, who was partly inspired by our research. I believe that on topics like this, very sensitive topics, knowledge must not remain exclusive to scientists, but must spread to the general public. Therefore, we should seek cross-pollination, interact with journalists and art workers. This topic should move beyond university lecture halls. After we discovered plastic in the placenta and human milk, we asked ourselves, where exactly was it in the placenta? How was it localized? And we located it, as you can see in these photographs, inside the placental cells near the mitochondria, which have already been mentioned to you, and near the endoplasmic reticulum. We discovered that the closer the plastic gets to the mitochondrion and the endoplasmic reticulum, the more these small intracellular organelles are morphologically deformed. Their shape is altered. And strangely, the plastic does not enter the cell nucleus. It is not yet clear why it remains in the cytoplasm, in the peripheral area. However, if you look at this beautiful illustration by Maria Mata, who worked with me on this research, you can see on the left a cell with its cytoplasm perfectly organized, mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and so on. On the right, conversely, is a cell invaded, infected. Because plastic behaves like a microorganism, it infects, infected by microplastics. One can observe a state of anarchy where the cellular structures are completely distorted. Here you can see these very interesting experiments on mice, showing that exposure to microplastics alters fetal growth. You might say, well, Ragusa, those are just mice. We can do without mice, but that is not the case, because in humans as well, the amount of plastic found within the placenta is inversely proportional to growth. In other words, the more plastic there is, the smaller the infants are, the smaller their brains are, and the smaller their heads are. And these are humans, they are not mice. Moreover, the amount of plastic present in the human placenta is correlated with premature birth, which is one of humanity's greatest misfortunes. Currently, worldwide, this varies by nation and the degree of development within those nations, but currently, 10% of children globally are born prematurely, and this is a source of dramatic disability across the world. It is the most significant source of disability globally, and this disability is correlated with the amount of plastic present in the mother's placentas. Other conditions, such as cholestasis, for instance, which is a significant disease, are also correlated with the amount of plastic in the placenta, as is the fetus's ability to respond to hypoxia. Perhaps you are unaware because you're not obstetricians like me, but for children to be born, they have to go through sort of a dangerous journey, a very perilous journey, and they face hypoxia. The more plastic there is in the placenta and the amniotic fluid, the less capable they are of coping with it. Unfortunately, this study from Hawaii illustrates how the amount of plastic present in placentas has increased dramatically over time. That is to say, if we examine the plastic levels from when I was born in the 1960s, fortunately, there was very little in my mother's placenta. But over time, this number has surged. These are the biochemical mechanisms that have already been mentioned, through which plastic causes damage to human beings. We don't have time to analyze them all in detail right now, but we're talking about inflammation, cytotoxicity, and cell death. When this happens inside a human being, specifically within the uterus, what follows are epigenetic changes. That is, our lives are altered. Therefore, plastic is capable of changing our lives starting from the womb. And it does change it. Here you see, for example, Alzheimer's, which we discussed earlier, or Parkinson's. But observe, something I am very keen to discuss with you is obesity. Obesity has been a phenomenon of the last 40 to 50 years, because when I was a child, obesity was almost non-existent. I attended a school with over 400 pupils. Only 2 were obese. Today, if you look at the rates of childhood obesity, you see nations, such as Mexico, where 30% of children are obese. These are the mechanisms through which plastic contributes to the development of obesity. Here you can see the increase in obesity across various nations in recent years. This slide is very evocative because it demonstrates how the quantity of plastic we discard into the environment is directly proportional to obesity, that is, to the growth of our waistlines. This is a point of significant interest, as plastic is obesogenic. It acts as an obesogen. If we examine all the diseases whose prevalence has increased dramatically in recent years, almost all of them share a correlation with plastics. These are complex pathologies. Obesity is a complex condition. It does not depend solely on plastic, but plastic exacerbates this process. We asked ourselves, how exactly does plastic make a person gain weight? It is somewhat peculiar, since plastic has no caloric value. So, what is the mechanism? Well, the answer is relatively straightforward. We conducted an experimental study in which we artificially infected certain placental cells with plastic and observed what happened to them. We saw exactly the same phenomena that we had observed in natural placentas. That is, those not subjected to our artificial intervention. If you focus your attention here, this is one of our micrographs showing a single cell. You can see the cell, and inside it, within the cell's cytoplasm, indicated by the arrows, you can see numerous bright spheres. These bright spheres are microplastics. They cluster together in the same way viruses or bacteria do, and they are of similar dimensions. Those we found are approximately 10 microns in size, very similar in scale. The cell mistakes them for viruses, bacteria, or antigens, and becomes activated in an attempt to destroy them. However, it cannot destroy them because plastic is indestructible. As a result, the cell gets altered, and its ability to respond is compromised because it cannot expel them. It can neither remove them from the cytoplasm nor destroy them as it does with viruses and bacteria. And this occurs because the cell does not recognize these particles. It may take a few million years of evolution before the cell learns to recognize it and handle it effectively. Plastic. As you know, and as has already been stated, the amount of plastic we discard into the environment is immense. Although I am neither a sociologist and certainly not a psychologist, over my years of studying plastic, I have developed some ideas as to why we human beings are so foolish as to flood our environment with plastic, thereby destroying it for our children and grandchildren. There are several reasons, which I describe in this work. We do not have time to explore them in detail, but essentially it stems from the fact that for millions of years, not thousands, not tens of thousands, but millions, humans perceived the environment as an enemy. And indeed, for millions of years, nature was an enemy. Imagine early humans, men or women alike, without modern scientific knowledge or understanding, standing in a forest in Borneo, knowing nothing, unable to read or write. Nature must have seemed truly terrifying to them. We have internalized this perception. We have absorbed it so deeply that even now we remain incapable of protecting the world around us. This is my final slide. It relates to a paper in which I draw a parallel between the ocean water and amniotic fluid in children. The symmetries, analogies, and similarities between ocean water, its specific concentrations of salts, magnesium, potassium, calcium, and so on, and amniotic fluid are astonishing. These two fluids are almost identical. Therefore, when we throw a plastic bottle onto the beach, it is as though we are throwing it into our mother's wombs, because all environments are interconnected. We are all part of a single, unified network. Can we do something about it? Yes, we can. Consider this. More than half of all the plastic produced worldwide is manufactured by just 20 companies. 20 companies that reap extraordinary profits. Yet the debt is paid by all of us, who gain absolutely nothing from this. Therefore, from a legislative standpoint, intervention is not impossible, although it is certainly not easy. I believe that since the world today is driven by economy, rather than politics, we must make it economically advantageous to preserve our planet. There are mechanisms that can be used. I describe them in this work. They are not the simplest, but we can seize this opportunity to change the world. I will conclude my presentation with this final, very striking slide. You may not know this, but today the leading cause of death among sea turtles is plastic. Thank you for your attention.